for it as well. It's an SP line. It should be alright. What I go SP, LP, and then I got SP as medium.
What's a high?
Extra. It's like a video. Yeah. And then but then I only get 3 hours, 30 minutes.
Okay, shooting in
SP, I think so too, yeah. Yeah, I am. It is. It's happening.
It'll be way better than this anyway.
Yeah. I missed you at the last Beastie Boys show. They said it on
Last one.
that was a good show. The Nick Cave? No, I didn't. Last show I went to. Tried to get Queen of Stone, and now I'm trying to get
Watch the line.
I go to get the ticket, and I say to the girl, "Watch it." She looks at it.
Whoa!
And the player makes about 30 people.
Like the filming, are we?
Well, he lives there.
All right.
Yeah, doing the filming. I mean, both did. You hold the camera once, and that's it. You're the guy. We'll catch up later.
Yes.
Yes, sounds good. Very, very good.
Chris?
You're clean. I've never seen you this handsome before.
My card?
How are you? I've got to bring that.
Yeah. Oh, no.
I did that. Yeah, usually the mask.
I got those happening right there. But just to look at the screen.
That's a great turnout.
Yeah. Talking to them here, they said it was difficult to get the faculty guys going. They're a little scattered. Yeah, what do they know? Can't remember their car keys. But once they started coming, the pictures and want to be there, and now it's, oh yeah, very nice, very nice. I like my suit. I only worn the suit. My one suit.
So it's a special suit.
It needs a wedding.
Getting bigger and smaller, bigger and smaller.
Thank you, diabetes. So I just have to drop. I'm on the diet now. I should be off the pills in a month. But just on Friday, I had to go get a blood test or cholesterol. I'm an athlete. Yeah.
Because you don't want to
die. No, I don't. I really don't. No, I don't. That's what my doctor said. Walking with drawing like that. He said, "It's like you're smoking." You got to you feel great. That's why I can't do it. That's what I keep saying. Yeah. And they all say smoking is a way back.
Thank you. Take a seat, please.
Just holding down and take the weight off. And always wear a suit.
Okay. Thank you. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steve Yu. I'm the chairman of the Department of Mining and Materials Engineering. Welcome to you all. In particular, I'd like to welcome Esther, David, Megan, and Isabel. Bill Williams was a true servant to McGill University, and his professorship is one to which any professor should aspire. Clearly, his powers as an educator and mentor are exemplified by this magnificent turnout today. But as a fellow chairman of the department, I'd also like to point out a more startling metric, that of Bill's chairmanship lasting from 1966 to 1980. That's 14 years, if my math serves me right. Or to put it another way, this covers the era starting from the Beatles' groundbreaking psychedelic album, Revolver, ending with the Bee Gees' final disco flick, Spirits Having Flown. In other words, it's a lifetime. So how did Bill last so long as a chair? Well, there's several explanations for this. The bureaucratic explanation is that he really chaired two departments. Metallurgical engineering up to 1972, and then mining and metallurgical from 72 to 80. I have to say that chairing two departments in one university is a wonder that is equivalent to 14 years as a chair of one department. There's another explanation, there's the nostalgic explanation, in that things were much more collegial in the goody oldie days at McGill. However, from what I hear, the goody oldie days is a bit like saying things were more idyllic in medieval times. Bill fought a lot of battles to keep the programs afloat, and obviously won most of them because, we're still here. I think the real reason, though, for his longevity lies in Bill's personality. I think it was Pierre Belanger, although don't quote me on this, the Dean of Engineering from 84 to 94, who said that after 8 years in any position of authority, you run out of friends. Well, you can see, maybe 4. But anyway, you can see, because that's beyond in the 4th year. Anyway, forget about me for the time being. Anyway, you can see that Bill didn't run out of friends, and we'll be listening to some of them right now. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jim Finch, who will say a few words. He's a professor in the department, and then he will introduce the rest of the speakers. So Jim.
Okay. Yes, here to celebrate a life lived. Bill Williams, family man, professional man, mentor, touched the lives of many, and I think we can see that with the gathering here today. And I encountered Bill before I even got to McGill. I wrote letters to many universities seeking a position for graduate studies. The only person to write back a handwritten letter was Bill Williams. He encouraged me to come, and as I found out later, very difficult to refuse Bill. Well, after the start of my career at McGill, Bill continued to help and mentor me. But even after he retired, he came back when I was put in charge of the co-op program. That meant we had to find work terms. Well, this was Bill's forte, finding summer jobs. He mentored students. Students were his passion. He came back, although he was retired, and I'm forever grateful for the help he gave. And it was such a thrill to watch the master at work, working those phone lines. You had to feel sorry for the people at the other end, cajoling them into taking yet another student. Thanks very much, Bill, for that. On a personal note, my wife and I, we bought a house in 1979, and virtually the first person to turn up was Bill. And he had 2 gooseberry bushes. Lois reminded me this morning, my wife reminded me this morning, he followed that up with rhubarb, daffodils. And being the great gardening man I am, my garden has gooseberry bushes, rhubarb, and daffodils. So I have a lot to thank Bill for, and and I'm sure that's what we're going to hear this afternoon. So it's my pleasure to start the proceedings by inviting Gordon Smith to come up and say a few words. Thank you, Jim. Welcome, everybody. I'm the first one. I'd like to remember Bill from the very first time when he stepped foot in the department, through to his being chairman, and I'll leave the rest to other speakers who come after me. I first arrived at McGill here in 1954. My father had died, and my mother had said, don't go too far away. I was heading for Victoria. I have a friend, said the headmaster of Lower Canada. His name was McGill. He just happens to be chairman of metallurgical engineering. So I went down to see him. Oh, come with me and I will look after you and this sort of thing. So fast forward, I went through a bachelor's degree. There was a small department at that time. In fact, the number of professors can be numbered just 1, 2, 3. There was McEwen, who was the extractive metallurgist. There was Hack Yates, who was the hydrometallurgist. And there was Jack Kirkcaldy, who was a wild sort of Irishman, who pulled up the end with physical metallurgy. He saw greener pastures in McMaster, so he left before I graduated, actually. He was replaced by a young Englishman by the name of Charlie Easteel. He didn't like teaching much, so 3 years later, he was gone. So by this time, we're getting close to 1960. I was a part-time graduate student, part-time teacher. We were looking for a metallurgist to fill the position. And McEwen had come down and said, you sit in this office here, right beside all the professors, all 3 of them, of course. And I went off for a summer job, and when I came back, there was a message from my other fellow graduate students. McEwen says, get out of that office, right now. Why right now? I turned around, and there were 2 guys standing in front of me, and the other graduate students. One was a slim little fellow, slightly bald, very nicely dressed, had absolutely nothing to say. Beside him was a bigger guy, curly hair, hail fellow well met, he had his hand out, shook our hands. I'm John Jonas, and I'm the physical metallurgist. Bill looked around and said, I'm Bill Williams, and I'm a physical metallurgist too. So the one physical metallurgist all of a sudden had 2 heads. We morphed into 2. Anyways, that was the first expansion of the department that I remember. So I went on 4 years. I got funny. You just cut me off here. I finished my master's degree in 61. Sorry, I have to yell a bit, I guess. I became a full-time teacher alongside Bill. We had many good times together. And then in 65, after 4 years, I was supposed to do my PhD in the evening, at night. Well, that didn't work out. Full-time job, teaching, lecturing, doing graduate work, doing administrative work. That didn't work at all. So I said to myself, I'm going to do something about this. So, without the pleasure of my chairman, Lieutenant Hack Yates, I went downstairs and became a full-time graduate student. This was 1965, the year before Bill was made chair for the first time. Times were tough in those days. Enrollments were down. The dean was despondent. Chairs were even more despondent. Mining engineering, which was of course closely allied to metallurgy, ran some of 3 students in 3 years. In 1 year, it had 2 students. So you can imagine what the smallest year was. Metallurgy was not far behind. A couple of
metallurgical engineering, and they found an Englishman by the name of Frank White to look after mining engineering. They were supposed to, quote, fix it up. Well, I'm glad to say that both men fixed it up. From then on, we grew, and we grew, and we grew. We started to hire more staff. That was nice. We became really good friends. Now, by 1980, which was the time that Frank White didn't pay us a good service, Frank White didn't pay us a good service. He had a massive heart attack and died. And so the mining department was leaderless again. And Dean Wardell at the time said, I don't want to go looking for another chair. We'll combine the two departments and we'll have mining and metallurgy together as one department. As Steve was saying, it's 1980, actually not 82. I remember it well. And in those days, as it is today, I believe, you have a 5-year appointment and a 5-year renewal. Well, Bill started in 1970 with a 5-year appointment, and it was renewed. Okay. Success. Thank you. So, he had 10 years, the 5 and 5, as chair of mining and metallurgical engineering, but the previous 4 was only metallurgical engineering. In those days were heady days. There seemed to be a lot of money around. There was an expansion. Bill would say to the department staff, what sort of a person would be hired tomorrow? We want, and it would be done. And then next year, he'd hire another person. We hired John Grzleski and Bill Thompson and Bill Davenport, who's not here today. The others are here. And it went on and on and on. And he always could find room, and I don't know how he found the money, but he found room for more and more staff. And we grew and grew and grew. And as Steve has said, and Jim, he liked the little guys. He was always supporting the little guys in the university or the undergraduate students. And we remember he started off with 5 or 6 in 3 years, and we needed a lot more than that. He instituted a scholarship program. Oh, he was so keen on those scholarships. I remember he had departmental scholarships. There would be 10 in mining, and there'd be 10 in metallurgy, $2,500 each. Where's the money all going to come from, Bill? Oh, no, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. He found it somewhere. One year we awarded 24 of them. He said, I don't know about the other 4. I said, never mind, just wait until they all come. Of course, 3 or 4 of them went somewhere else, where our success rate was not exactly 100%, but it was good enough. And he encouraged people with students with summer jobs. And this was in an era when the departments didn't get involved in finding jobs for the students. The students found it themselves, and it would be fine. If they didn't, that was tough. You could sit at home and watch TV all summer. They didn't care, but we cared. And Bill did this all the first 10 years anyways, while he was chairman. So he did all the scholarship stuff, which Mayon Zan does today. He did all the job hunting, which Jenny Snyder does today. He did all the things that Chairman does, which Steve does today. And he still had time for teaching, and research, and consulting on the side. So, amazing that he could do all these things like that. He also encouraged staff to get developed. And I tell my own story. He hired me in 1967. Remember, remember 66, 65 were the tough years. So it was just after he'd become chair and tough years. And I always remember my so-called appointment. He came downstairs to the lab where I was, and he said, "I'll speak to you for a minute." Went out in the hall. He said, "Would you like a job?" And I thought he meant, well, he had some more ISOTs he wanted prepared, he wanted some more mechanical testing done, he wanted this and that. No. He says, "I've got a permanent job for you. It's teaching in mineral processing." By this time, mineral processing was part of metallurgical engineering. Oh, okay. So he shook my hand, we went upstairs, and that was it. We never heard another thing about it until the fall, and I had my oral and started teaching. A few months later, chairman of the board of governors sent me a letter saying you were appointed to the rank of so-and-so and such and such. But that was it. There was no formality, no forms to fill out. I hadn't even prepared a CV at that point. It was that simple. You all know that today, if you don't have a CV, you don't go anywhere. So I remember a year after I was hired, he said to me, "You know, the annual general meeting of CIM is in Vancouver. I think you should go." "Why should I go?" "Well, there are lots of mining engineers there, and you should meet some of them. There are a lot of mineral processors, and you should meet some of them. Oh, and by the way, don't come back too fast." He said, "Take a while off and go and visit some of the mines." And I thought he meant 2 or 3 days or something like this. And he says, no. He says, "Make it at least 3 weeks. So, and I'll pay for it." Well, in those days, wow. I didn't have the money for 3 weeks going around mine. I always remember going to the travel agent. She didn't know what I was asking. To go to Grand Falls, Montana? Where's that? To go to even Esterhazy, Saskatchewan? Where's that? I don't know. She made a real mess of the timetable, but we got through it. That was my first and only time visiting a potash mine. I'll bet there are few people in this room that have been in a potash mine. There'll be a few, but not very many. He encouraged me to develop further and do administrative work. He encouraged me to get on the scholarships committee. Maybe he had an ulterior motive, and maybe he thought he could get more university scholarships if he got me on. I'm busy, sadly mistaken. But I did it. I also got on the pensions committee on his suggestion. That was the days, late 70s. It was just the same as today. The pension fund was short of dollars. The university had to put money in. So here we were sitting at a committee, and the university was complaining to us on one side they didn't want to pay the X million dollars. On the other hand, we had staff complaining they weren't being paid enough money. So you can't win on both sides. And finally, he suggested I become associate dean in the early 80s, which I did for almost 10 years. I don't think it was 5 and 5, but it was nearly 10 years. I enjoyed that a lot, and it was due to him. On the social side, I remember a couple of things. When the department was small, Bill would hire a sleigh and horses and drivers at Christmas time. And the whole department would go for a sleigh ride up on the mountain. I always remember these sleigh rides. And then we were invited back to Bill's house. "Oh yeah, come on down to Metcalf." I remember going into an old-fashioned house for those who know it, big veranda. You came inside the door, big fire in the fireplace, great big pot of baked beans. The whole apartment was invited. Not just the staff or some of the staff or this sort of thing. But the house could hold everybody. Now what a time. We had a wonderful meal, and then Bill says, "Well, it's time for a sing-song. Okay, guys, you all have to sing. Sing for your supper, sort of thing, or sing thank people after your supper." We always remember that. I was talking to my daughter the other day about this speech, and she said, "You can't go, you can't finish without talking about the killings." Bill and Esther had a cat, and that cat was forever pregnant. And you can imagine what comes after being pregnant. There was always a bunch of kittens. Bill would be sent off in the morning. Bill, come home with 2 homes for kittens. We need them. Need them out of the house now. And eventually he got to me. I took a kitten. And we took her up to Toronto, him I guess it was. And he managed to get killed by a car. A year later we needed another one. Guess what? Bill had more. And we were doing it again. The second one lasted 17 years. By the end of 17 years, Bill, do you have another kitten? No, we're out of business now. We're out of business now. So I had to go somewhere else. We still have kittens. I always remember him and kittens. And now I think I've probably talked enough. I've probably talked more than my 5 minutes. And I'd like to pass the torch to the next person. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. I'm glad we missed those kittens, by the way. We should add that hiring at McGill is a little different than it was there. Next, I'd like to call on John Brzezinski. John was at McGill from the 60s. He was chair of the department, and I know he and Bill shared many secrets and many good times. So, John, please.
Thank you, Jim, and I'm really glad I never needed any kittens. Like many of you in this room this afternoon, I owe a lot to Bill Williams. He hired me in 1968, sight unseen, never had an interview. In fact, the first time I met him was the day I showed up for work in January of 1969. He hired me from a postdoc in Germany on the basis of a CV, a letter of application, and a couple of references. You could do things like that back then, as Gordon has alluded to, unencumbered by hiring committees and all of the excessive internal bureaucracy that characterizes university hiring today. In his 14 years as department chair, he hired many young faculty who went on to create an outstanding department of mining and metallurgical engineering, and later that has transformed into mining and materials engineering. In many ways, Bill was far ahead of his times, and informally he introduced many practices that are now taken for granted in university systems. For example, the concept of industrial sabbaticals for faculty in engineering is something that's becoming rather popular. But Bill believed that his young engineering hires should indeed be exposed to real engineering. And so he pushed us out into industry during the summer months, the early years of our McGill careers. Most of the time, he actually arranged for our first summer job. This he did with great facility because Bill, at the time, knew virtually everyone of influence in the metallurgical and mining industries in Canada. And believe it or not, Montreal at that time, in the 1960s, was actually the center of Canada's mining industry. It was just before that began to move westward to Toronto. Bill had a little book with the phone numbers in it for all of these important people. And he simply created these summer sabbaticals for us. The summer sabbaticals ended up creating a faculty whose young professors very readily tackled real engineering problems and were able to be at the forefront of real engineering research. And this paid off in spades many years later when applied engineering research became a government priority in the late 1970s and then through the 80s, and indeed as it still is, a priority which fortunately for many of us was associated with quite generous funding from the governments at both federal and provincial levels. Bill was also very much a student's man, devoted to undergraduate teaching and the undergraduate student body. He believed that the undergraduate students should also be exposed to real engineering right from the end of their first year. And in the days when co-op programs were just evolving in places such as the University of Waterloo, Bill instituted the summer job program that Gordon mentioned. He did this for many years entirely on his own, using his little book of phone numbers of important people. As I recall, there was little democracy in this process, and students were more or less told where they were going to go for the summer. Woe betide the student who gave Bill a hard time about the location of his summer job. And Bill made a point of trying to place students whose homes were in Montreal as far from Montreal as he possibly could, in the belief that students had to learn to fend on their own and be away from mom and dad. And I'm sure that many of you who have children who are perhaps still in the nest would agree with that. Students in difficulty could always count on Bill for help, be it in the form of mentorship or something more concrete. On occasion, he would make a loan, a financial loan, to students who needed a few dollars. Now, Bill had a large safe in his office with a big bag full of money. The origins of this money are known only to the chair of the department and former chairs of the department. And I hope that Steve, in fact, still has the safe and a large bag of money. Indeed, this big box of money helped many a student out of temporary financial difficulty, and to my knowledge, none of them ever defaulted on the loan. Bill's devotion to McGill was legend. He often referred to the university as Mother McGill, and I recall his telling me shortly after I arrived, early in 1969, that if I treated Mother McGill right, she would do the same thing for me. Indeed, his criticisms of the university were few and far between throughout his long career. And those of us who've been able to witness the development of McGill over almost half a century can really see that Bill's confidence in this institution was well-founded. Of course, no one is perfect. And on occasion, Bill got funny ideas into his head, and we young faculty had to somehow deal with these. I'll cite just one example. In the early 1970s, there was a graduate student by the name of Jim Finch. And Jim was approaching the end of his PhD studies. There appeared in the department a vacancy in his particular area of expertise. Gordon mentioned that vacancies just seem to appear out of nowhere, and we never quite figured out where they came from. We really wanted Jim to be appointed to this position. Recall that this was the time when there were no hiring committees as such with their long, contentious meetings. There was, however, a cloud on the horizon. And this was that young Jim was sometimes seen walking the halls in his bare feet. Now, in Bill's mind, a successful academic career at McGill and walking the halls in your bare feet was just not a reasonable combination. However, as I mentioned, we really wanted to hire Jim. And the young faculty, I believe it was Rod Guthrie, Gordon Smith, and myself, we were, of course, people of great tact. And we managed to convince Bill that if Jim were hired, Jim would no doubt buy a pair of shoes. Well, Bill bought the argument, Jim bought the shoes, and the rest is history. And I can assure you, Jim, that Bill never for a moment regretted his decision. Finally, I just want to mention something about lunch. Lunch was an institution with Bill. Bill never brought his lunch to work, and rather he encouraged those of us who happened to be available over the noon hour to go en group for lunch at one of the many inexpensive restaurants that existed at that time quite close to the campus. We built collegiality, we discussed religion, we discussed Quebec politics, which was always an interesting subject. We discussed federal politics and just about everything in between. In fact, lunch became a tradition. It was actually a tradition that I adhered to throughout my entire career, for I also, using Bill's example, never packed a lunch for work. In later years, after Bill had retired, he would still come into the department a couple of days of the week during the academic term. I was in the dean's office, and during that, on days when I didn't have myself a business luncheon or a meeting, I would sometimes give Bill a call and we would go downtown for a sandwich. In fact, it was at one of those sandwich lunches that was one of the very, very last times that I recall seeing Bill. Bill was a good man, a good friend, a true educator, and a loyal servant to McGill University. We will miss him, and McGill will miss him. Thank you.
I think I'm going to say thank you, John. I sort of inadvertently said you had secrets, and I don't know why I said that, but apparently I hit the mark there. So. But now I understand you're absolutely right. He did get us to go out and work in the summer. And you pointed out that those that lived in Montreal, he'd send them the furthest away. And I now realise why my first job that Bill got me was in Pine Point in the Northwest Territories on Great Slave Lake. I thought that was just an accident. To be fair, that was a terrific experience. Would I have gone there ordinarily? No, but Bill arranged that, and you're absolutely right. That's something to remember. Bill did have some funny ideas. I liked his definition. He would ask, why would anybody invent a unit that took 2.5 of them to make an inch? Quite right. The other was how to handle an unruly student. He would say, shut up, I explained. These things one remembers all of a sudden. The sleigh ride too, I remember that. Rod, can you come up and say a few words? Rod Guthrie also, his name has been mentioned high in the 60s, with us all the times that Bill was chairman.
Well, I'll keep mine short, my remarks, but yes, it's a pleasure to be up here to talk about Bill. I turned up in 1967, so he came over to London. I was applying for jobs around North America. Most of my friends were going into the steelworks in Pittsburgh, and I decided I didn't know enough still, so I wanted to do a postdoc somewhere. So I had two choices. It was either McGill or Colorado School of Mines. And Professor Bradshaw, my supervisor, said, have you got your Vietnam helmet yet, Guthrie? So I decided perhaps McGill, even though we read in the papers there were letter bombs going off in Westmount, I decided that perhaps I would consider McGill. So Bill came over to interview me, asked me to take him for a nice meal somewhere in London. So I took him for a very nice meal, and he paid the bill, and he was quite astounded at the price of the bill. And he was complaining about the weight of the change in his pocket. But at the end of the meal, he said, well, he says, instead of coming as a postdoc, why don't you come as a professor? I said, well, why? He said, well, it'll be the same, don't worry, you'll do the same stuff, you can work in industry and do that sort of thing, and you don't have to teach much, you can do research, it's no difference. But he said, well, it'll be $9,000, not $10,000. I'd been offered $10,000, so I said, well, no, I think I want to come as a postdoc because I don't want to stay too long. And he said, well, look, we'll make it $10,000 and we'll call it a day. So I said, okay. So here I am. Still here 40 years later. So that was okay. And then when I got over here, there was nowhere to stay. I came over with Margaret on the boat. We arrived June the 5th, 1967 it was. And we arrived, we were greeted by Bill Davenport and Bill Williams, and there was no accommodation to be had, so Bill offered his place to stay at his place, so I spent some time in his basement because I discovered there was some beer down there. It was beer that was aged quite badly, and there was even sediment at the bottom, so I decided, well, that has to be looked after. So he was in Gravenhurst. When he came back, we moved up the hill to another place, Professor Olson's house, and spent some time up there. And then we finally got into our accommodation after everybody had gone home, after the end of summer. And so we were there. And it's true, Bill Williams got me my first summer job in industry. He talked to Don Knight, who was Director of Research at Atlas Steels in Welland, and arranged for me and Margaret to go down and spend the summertime there. And that was fine, except that a few days before we were due to depart, Margaret went to the bank and took out $400 and brought it back to our apartment. It was on De Rocher Street. And somebody came in the middle of the night and took the money. I chased him out and all that sort of thing, but when we came back to find out what had happened, we'd lost the money. So I was complaining to Bill about this, and Bill said, well, don't worry, let's go and talk to the Dean, Dean Mordell. We'll see what he's got to say about it. So we went off to see the Dean, and the Dean Mordell said, well, how much was it? I said, it was $400, sir. And so he got up without any ado and said, he went over to his big safe. He had opened it up, $400, and then I decided, well, this is a good place. So we went off in good shape for the rest of the summer, and then after that, Bill ran the department very efficiently, and we carried on. And when he left, I used to meet him quite often when he walked up and down to the Metro. It's called the Metro store now in Westbound. So he would be going up and down. We'd have our chats again, and it was very, very nice. So he was rather like a father figure. In the middle years, I probably spent a bit too much time in industry for him. So my McGill career got a bit of a downslide, but that didn't matter too much. So I'd spent 24 years working in industry, but then I didn't have the time to do that anymore. So we got back together again, and it's been a great disappointment when I heard that he had passed away. He didn't look quite so well in the last 2 years, and he was 84 when he died. So I'll miss him very much, and I'm sure we all will. Thank you.
that accounting at McGill is a little stricter now. In fact, it's become quite onerous, and I'm beginning to realise why the accountants are so busy researching what everything's going. So, these safes, you don't have one of those, do you? No. I'd like now to invite George Demopoulos. George is another chair of the department, and he also has a long memory going back to the 70s in this case. Bill's influence on his career as much as Bill's. Good.
Thank you, Jim. Dear Esther, Megan, David, Isabel, and all other members of the Bill Williams family, past students, colleagues, friends of Bill Williams. It is with strong emotions and a deep sense of gratitude that I join you today in remembering Professor Williams. The man who touched my life and shaped my career as no one else since I came to Canada in 1975. At that time, Bill Williams, chairman, and not chair as we say today, of our department, took personal interest in my studies, always asking questions about progress and encouraged me to complete my studies on time, not like some other student friends of mine that took their time. It is interesting to mention here, and by the way, I mention all these anecdotal details to show you through my personal experience how Bill conducted himself, like the others did, I guess. So soon after I came to do my master's under the supervision of Phil Disting, I got a scholarship with a letter signed by Bill Williams as well. The scholarship was $3,000 back in 1975, but it was enough to cover the living expense for a student. I had second thoughts about the topic of my thesis, so I went to Bill to see him and asked permission to change supervisor and research topic because hydrometallurgy sounded kind of a strange subject to me at that point. Well, Bill listened to me, and then in his firm voice, persuasive voice, he said, "Of course you can change, but I think you're going to regret it because hydrometallurgy is an exciting field and so on. But by the way, if you change, there's no scholarship." So I guess that's it. So you know me, why I followed, the career that I followed after that. In another occasion in spring 1979, Phil Disting was spending his sabbatical leave in England at the Cabot School of Mines, and Bill took personal interest to send me to spend some time with Phil Disting at Cabot in southern England, so I will not be alienated from my supervisor. I mean, that he was the chairman of the department who held a student of another professor in this way. After my graduation, back in fall 1982, I was visiting the department when I was a postdoctoral fellow at Carmet in Ottawa, and I recall it was Bill who encouraged me to apply for an NSERC University Research Fellowship, a program that served very well our department because several of us started their academic careers with such a scholarship like Frank Mucharpi and Ralph Harris. And this position then was converted later to a tenure track appointment and so on. In every critical step of my career path, Bill Williams was there offering support and advice. Academics, by the nature of the peer pressure system, tend to be self-centered, worrying mostly about their research work, with less time to reflect on and contribute to the common enterprise that unites us all. Well, Bill Williams begged to differ from this model. Bill cared about the well-being of his department and the success of all its members, from the undergraduate students to support staff and academic colleagues. Bill took particular pride in promoting the department and building its influence both within McGill and across the country. He was a pioneer, as we heard already, about the summer job program for the undergraduate students, a program that really served well the department. And while other programs disappeared from other universities across Canada, our program prospered. When I was chair of the department in the mid-90s, I had the opportunity to take a glimpse of the way Bill operated behind the scenes over a long period of time. There, in a folder of having copies of old letters from the 60s and 70s, I saw Bill sending letters to individuals like John Howard Ambrose, giving them end of year report, news from the department. And he kept that year after year from the 60s all the way, but now that was early 90s. Well, at that time, John Howard Ambrose passed away, and his will, he left a considerable amount of money to create a scholarship to support undergraduate students. The same way Bill helped fundraising. I recall the generous gift from INCO in the mid-90s, $750,000, that Bill helped through his contacts with Mike Sopko to generate. This was Bill Williams' way. In conclusion, I want to refer to this picture. Taken in '96, I believe, at Martin Knopfler's retirement. In this picture, where you see several people that many of you recognize, and they're among us today, including our current chair, Steve, there, front row. Well, Steve, before I talk more about the picture, I want to say that I'm sure Bill will be happy to know of all recent new appointments in our department. Bill believed in hiring young academics. Soon after their PhDs, I mean, we heard all the stories, seen them blossom, and along them bringing a bright future to the department. So return to this picture, where everybody looks happy. I think the happiest of all is Bill Williams. Look how radiant his face is, and how he stands out, taller than anybody else. I think this picture captures Bill's presence in our department and in our lives more than anything else. Bill liked to focus on people and be among them, sharing their successes and accomplishments, while at the same time, without any particular effort, in the most natural way, as a genuine leader and visionary, showed the way and brought the best out of everyone around him. Bill, you will always be a guiding light and an inspiration. I feel blessed that I met you and had the good fortune to have you as teacher, mentor, and respected colleague. I'm sure the same sentiments are shared by everyone gathered here today, and by many more, past students and colleagues who did not make it in here today, or who left us prematurely, like Andrea Laplant and Ralph Harris. It was an honor to have known him. May his memory be eternal. Thank you.
Thank you, George. I'd now like to move to a family member, Maggie Kilgore, Bill's niece. She's going to say a few words, representing.
Well, actually, I'm speaking from a double identity today. Both as a member of the McGill community, I teach in the Department of English, and as Bill's niece. So this gives me a slightly different perspective. It also means that everyone's been talking about sort of going back with Bill to the 1960s. I go back even further. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine last night, Caroline, who lives in Wales, and who was introduced to me by Esther and Bill. When I asked her what I should say about Bill today, she said, well, why don't you talk about the first time you met him? The problem with that is that, like Meg, like Liz, Dave, Lucy, Alice, Dexter, Zyla, Billy, Jack, my cousin Chris as well, I don't remember a time before I knew Bill. He's always been there for me. His constant love, loyalty, and overriding kindness has been a constant presence in my life.